Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Peter walked out of the restaurant with his coats open. It was freezing mid-February after all, but the man didn't feel cold at all, and he wanted to be in his car as soon as possible. It was warm, quiet, empty, without these people and their looks, curious, sympathetic, interested. Peter was not in the right state to communicate with them. They don't expect any words or actions from him. They watch his reactions carefully. Peter opened the door of a brand new glossy foreign car, lowered himself into the driver's seat. The man had just recently taken the car from the showroom and was as happy as a child. Alice had joked even then about someone who hadn't played with a toy car as a child. She smiled, and Peter imagined how in the spring they would go to the Capitol in this very car to walk around Red Square, have dinner in a restaurant located near Madison Square Garden, just wander the streets of New York and talk about this and that as they used to. Peter was still sure then that his wife would recover. He didn't even doubt it. What could be serious in a young woman leading a healthy lifestyle? Just a temporary ailment. How wealthy and naive was he then? At the thought of his wife, Peter's heart clenched painfully. In his head did not fit that she is no longer there. Lizia's life was cut short. Now he was returning from her funeral. It was the most terrible day of his life. The man realized that some episodes of the event would haunt him for the rest of his days. Dreams would keep him awake at night. In front of his eyes stood Alice, fortunately not as she was today. Cold, still frozen expression, happy, lively, cheerful, smiling. Peter tried to imagine his wife exactly like that, to keep in his memory his favorite image in the most minute details. And yet, to his surprise, the man realized it was impossible. Some things were already forgotten. For example, he could hardly remember her voice. After all, only a short time had passed. Until 3 days ago, Alice was alive. She was sick. Peter knew it was serious even then. He had no idea it would end up like this. The doctors had discovered that Alice had a very rare form of blood cancer. The treatment didn't work, but there was still hope. It seemed necessary to find other doctors. Get Alice into a better clinic, and everything would be fine. Peter was constantly in touch with specialists from all over the country, and even foreign medical luminaries. Alice was treated, examined, given expensive drugs, chemo sessions, and the results were short-lived. At the hospital, her vitals seemed to start improving. Alice would be discharged, but at home, it would happen again. Weakness, worsening pain tests. In recent months, Alice had become a pale shadow of herself. She had always been slender, but the disease had taken its toll on the young woman. Alice resembled a living skeleton of bones, tight earth of raw skin color and bruises under huge blue eyes. An unnatural poverty. Alice's lush ace hair had rotted and thinned. She didn't even have the energy now to get to the bathroom or make herself breakfast. Nor if, frankly, did she want to at all. But Alice had to eat, as the doctors said, even if she didn't want to. Peter worked hard. He couldn't leave his business. He couldn't quit his job. Of course, he wanted to spend more time with his wife. She needed so much help. But the treatment required a lot of money, so the man did his best. Good, at least near Alice in his absence, were her mother, Helen, and childhood friend, Emily. Emily was never far from Alice's side. Helen was sick herself. She'd always had a weak heart, and the situation with her daughter worsened her condition many times over. Several times an ambulance took the elderly woman right out of Peter and Alice's apartment. But Emily turned out to be a real rescue. The woman worked remotely, filling out product cards for the market playoffs. It wasn't much of an income, but Emily was happy about it. She graduated from culinary school and specialty work, did not want to carry heavy pots all day to spend in the kitchen riding heat. Oh no. Emily found herself a completely different way to earn money. Such a free schedule came in handy for Emily. A friend could look after Alice without any problems. She would come to Peter and Alice's apartment with her laptop in the morning. She would only leave in the evening when the landlord returned. Emily would entertain Alice with conversation. She also cooked for her special meals recommended by specialists. She offered her pills in time, fed and fed her by the hour, did not let her friend fall into despondency. Constantly slowing down, lived, remembered some funny incidents from their common childhood. Peter was very grateful to Emily. She had done a lot for Alice, and for him too. Emily had supported him during the days of Alice's serious illness. And afterwards, when everything had happened, there were a lot of people at the funeral. But of course, Alice was so young, so active, so social. Peter couldn't even mentally add words to all those definitions. He still didn't believe it. Alice's coworkers and Peter's relatives, friends and girlfriends, were a whole bunch of people. The man was even confused to see such a gathering of people at the gates of the church where his beloved was to be buried. Of course, they all mourned, cried, expressed sympathy. But life always takes its own course. Peter, despite the fact that he was in some incredible state to notice details, people talked among themselves on distracted topics and even smiled sometimes. Yes, the loss of Face was a tragedy for each of them. They knew her and maybe even loved her. But the feelings of those who came, they were nothing compared to what he was experiencing. They couldn't understand the depth of his despair, couldn't feel his pain. And that irritated him. Peter restrained himself from saying anything rude to anyone. Helen, Alice's mother, was barely holding on with only Helen and Emily. Only these two people were grieving, just like Peter. They too had lost someone important. Helen's own daughter and friend, practically a sister. She and Alice grew up together. They had so much in common, and yet Emily found the strength to support both Peter and Helen. Alice's mother was painful to look at in general. I would like to hug her, to tell the old woman the right words. Except he couldn't physically do it too hard. Too scary, too painful. Then it's all later. The funeral at the cemetery, then the wake at the restaurant. The feast was still in full swing when Peter suddenly realized that he couldn't stay here any longer. He didn't want to go home either. Everything that reminded him of Alice. How to enter the apartment, knowing that the beloved spouse will never be here again. And yet to stay among all these people who were no longer shy, talking animatedly, looking at each other, smiling. It happened as if involuntarily by itself. The guests tried to keep a sad expression, befitting the occasion, but life was taking its toll. Anyway, Peter got up from his chair and without saying goodbye to anyone, moved towards the exit. Emily noticed it and hurried after him. "Where are you going?" The woman held Peter by the arm. He had already left the hall into the lobby. "I can't be here anymore," the man answered honestly. "Home." Peter nodded briefly. "Do you want me to come with you?" Emily stared intently into Peter's eyes. With one hand, the woman held him by the elbow. With the other, she stroked his back soothingly. Worried. So much involvement in her, so caring, good Emily. A loyal friend. After all, once Emily did not like Peter. He even argued about it with Alice, who assured that her friend was the most faithful and reliable person in the world. Well, that's how it turned out in the end. Alice was right. Life proved it. "How can I go with you?" Emily repeated the question. "No, you shouldn't. I want to be alone, whatever you say. But if anything, call me right away, any time of day or night. If you want to talk, if you need anything, it's hard for me too. Grief is easier to get through, I guess." Emily lowered her eyes. She seemed to be fighting back tears at that very moment. "You should stay with Helen. She doesn't look so good." "I can't do it myself." Emily nodded briefly. Yes, Helen had had a very hard time. Was it a joke to lose your only daughter, young, beautiful, funny? The woman had put her whole life into Alice, stretched herself to give her daughter at least the bare essentials. It was hard, but she did it. And here's the bottom line. Helen was literally supported by some relative of hers, either a cousin or a grandniece. Peter didn't know the connection. A woman a little younger than Helen looked was always with her, then a pill, then a vial or something to her nose. She was keeping an eye on the poor mother's condition. It's good that we found such a person. Peter won't abandon Helen. He'll always be there for her. And they would talk some more, but that would be later. Now the man had neither moral nor physical strength for that. He sat in the car and stared without seeing at the street. Snow and frost were not his or Alice's favorite time of year. Winter was already tiring of spring waiting for a long time to come. Peter was in no hurry to get home. He realized that there are a lot of Alice's things, and how to look at them now, if even without these things in his head only she. Alice and Peter met about 5 years ago. It was at a sports club where Alice worked as a fitness trainer. Actually, the girl led group classes. There were women going to her. She supervised them. There were other trainers in the gym, but there weren't enough for everyone. Therefore, Alice, seeing how wrongly the novelty of using fitness equipment, consulted him, although she was not supposed to do so. Alice took an instant liking to Peter. You bet she did. Tall, slender, trim, huge blue eyes beautiful. Shimmering in the light, blonde hair a beauty. That's just it. There were many pretty girls in the trainers, the eye pleased, but Alice stood out for her naturalness and friendliness. She was warm, open, smiling. It was immediately apparent that the girl loved what she did. This quality could not but arouse Peter's respect. He himself was exactly the same. As Peter and Alice gradually became closer, their relationship became friendly. They joked with each other, shared the news of the day, got to know each other, getting closer and closer. Peter was afraid to make the first move. That's at work. He was determined and confident. Took on difficult projects, handled the toughest tasks, even took risks. But talking to Alice, asking her out on a date or even to the movies, that was scary. Because, well, what if they refuse? And then how to communicate then? There would be awkwardness between them. Alice will start avoiding him. There's no telling how it would have ended if Alice hadn't taken the initiative. I hear the Steel Eagles are coming here. She approached Peter one day. Maybe we should go because my friend Emily doesn't listen to that kind of stuff. Peter was kind of taken aback for a second. He and Alice often talked about their musical preferences. They both liked rock. They both listened to the Steel Eagles, among other things. Peter had seen posters posted around the city, but for some reason it hadn't occurred to him to take the opportunity to invite a girl to a concert. And Alice, from her lips, the proposal to visit this event together sounded so easy, so natural and relaxed. Of course, Peter had agreed. He doubted whether to offer Alice to pay for her ticket or not. Maybe the girl would take it the wrong way. Alice came to the rescue. It turned out that she had an aunt working in the ticket office, and she got 2 free tickets for her niece. So the matter resolved itself. Peter was with Alice outside the gym for the first time. They walked side by side from time to time, casually touching each other with their hands or shoulders, discussing the rock band, the newcomers to the gym, and even Peter's work. Yes, Alice seemed genuinely interested in what Peter was doing. You're so smart, figuring out all those percentages and graphs. I wish I had a head like that. Peter knew by then that Alice was trying to go to university right after school, and also to study economics, just like him. Only she didn't have enough points to pass the minimum threshold. And the competition that year for the prestigious department was very high. But the girl was not upset. Economics did not attract her too much. Yes, and math, logic, and similar disciplines she did not particularly like. Rather, enrollment in economics was the desire of Alice Helen's mother. She believed that the economist profession is monetary and respected. That's why in high school, despite the meager salary, hired tutors for her daughter. Only those still did not cope with their task, the girl never entered the desired faculty. But her other dream came true. Alice from childhood had a passion for sports. She from the first grade attended a sports school gymnastics department, went to competitions, received discharges stars from the sky was not enough, but certain successes still achieved. Alice very inspiringly told Peter about her feelings. You know, it is such an inexpressible feeling when you feel your whole body, every cell. When I missed a few training sessions in a row, I immediately felt this lightness, agility disappear. Now it's the same, I just relax and that's it. They say movement is life for a reason. Alice wanted to make other people happy and healthy. Let them also feel this muscular joy. Let them become more beautiful and energetic. Alice didn't want to be a trainer at a children's school. She felt that she was not too good for working with young children who might be future champions. But the work at the fitness club is up to her. The trainer contributed to the enrollment of one of her favorite students in a pedagogical university. Alice studied there with pleasure, got her diploma, and got a job in a sports club. She shared her impressions with Peter. First of all, I like the movement. I can't do without it. Secondly, it's nice to see how people gradually transform, lose weight, become more confident. But thirdly, I am always in good shape myself. Peter smiled. Yes, Alice was in good shape. They fit well, even the simple things from the cheap stores. It was impossible not to admire her slim figure. That first night after the concert, Peter finally decided to tell the girl about his feelings. The moment was just right. They were walking through a deserted autumn park, tall bright lanterns and trees decorated with golden foliage. And no one around. You know, I really like you, Peter said decisively, looking into the huge blue eyes of his charming companion. Understand me correctly, and I you. But at last Alice smiled. I thought I'd never make up my mind. I know I can see it all. Why are you so tense? I really like you too, don't I? Peter couldn't believe his ears at the time. Just like that, it turns out to be simple and easy. And what? Only so much time. And they started seeing each other. Walking around the city, sitting in cozy cafes, trips to the countryside. Gradually, Peter and Alice got to know each other's friends. That's how Peter got to know Emily, the best friend of his favorite girl. For some reason, he didn't like Emily right away. She was a pretty red-haired girl. Short, nice round green eyes, quite attractive. A big smile, a ringing laugh. Seemed like a wonderful girl. And yet, Alice and Emily grew up together. They lived in neighboring entrances, played in the same sandbox, and became first graders, even sat at the same desk, always and everywhere together. Emily was also involved in gymnastics at first. The girls went to the gym together, but Emily was not very good at it. She couldn't even get the second junior category, so she just sat on the third. And then she quit, of course. But Alice stayed. Emily, like Alice, could not boast of success in studies. The girls were weak and good for 24 hours, and then they slipped to threes. True, thanks to the efforts of tutors, Alice still managed to get a good certificate. To enter the university, it did not help her. Nevertheless, Emily graduated from the culinary college. The girl, as she expressed herself, was not going to work hard and therefore found a not burdensome occupation. Filling out product cards at Marketplace, they earned pennies, but for life in general was enough. Despite the initial data, Emily was quite an ambitious girl. She planned to open her own business in the future. However, she did not take any steps in this direction, explaining it by the congestion at work and other life circumstances. There was something unnatural about India. But Peter did not share these impressions and observations with Alice. He saw how close the girls were. They often talked about some episodes from their childhood and youth, showing their connection in every possible way. Peter did not want to upset his beloved. Alice was worried about Emily. She was having trouble with guys for some reason. She even asked Peter to introduce her to someone, a friend or a colleague. Peter tried. He had a young unmarried programmer at work, a nice guy, only very shy, inexperienced. He wasn't very good with girls, just like Peter used to be. It didn't work out. The programmers went on one date, and that was it. The guy then evasively explained to Peter that they didn't fit each other's personality. And a little later, the friend admitted that Emily took him too quickly, made a capricious princess of herself on the first date, and demanded some kind of investment. Hinted at a trip to an expensive store. All in all, the guy suddenly felt like he was being used. An unpleasant feeling of a second date he didn't want. Peter also didn't like Emily's jokes about Alice. It seemed like friendly banter, but it was a little too precious about her friend's accomplishments and her dignity. At least, that's what it seemed to Peter. And yet Emily turned out to be a great friend. She was always there for Alice. When she needed help, she supported her in difficult situations, found the right words to cheer her up. The girls seemed to understand each other with half an eye. But they should, considering the length of their friendship. It was Emily who had been by Alice's side when she was fading away. Even on the very last day, when Alice was already very ill, Emily had managed to bring a faint smile to her friend's face. Peter couldn't do it, no matter how hard he tried. Emily, on the other hand, was doing fine. On those hard days, Peter even felt guilty. He had never treated Emily well. She turned out to be such a loyal friend. Emily had helped him with the funeral, too. Peter was in a state of prostration. He didn't know who to call, what to do. Emily took care of everything. All he had to do was get the money. Who to transfer it to? The man shook his head and pushed away the unpleasant memories. He was still sitting in the car. It was already getting dark. People were leaving the restaurant in small groups. They were all the people who had come to say goodbye to Alice tonight. Peter saw a cab pull up. Helen and her relative got in, the one who had been helping her all this day, cheering her on. Emily walked them both to the car and then headed off to some acquaintances she and Alice had in common. Apparently, they were supposed to give her a ride home. Emily didn't notice. The man was glad of that. She would have wanted to talk to him, to comfort him. And Peter wanted to be alone. The man chased the scenes of helplessness out of his mind. Alice's ears on the bed in the bedroom. The features of the face shot up. The lips turned pale. Even then, one could realize that there was no escape. But Peter paid no attention to all these signs. He was full of plans and hopes. The man arranged for Alice to be transported to a Moscow clinic. Everyone had already given up on her. But one professor still decided to try an experimental treatment. He didn't give any guarantees. But it was still a chance. And Emily had her doubts. She tried to tell Peter that Alice shouldn't be tortured. She needed peace. How could she travel to the capital in such a serious condition? Her opinion decided nothing. But still Peter was not pleased that the girl was so zealous to dissuade him. Only he held himself in check. Emily had done so much for Lesia, for both of them. When the symptoms of the disease began to appear, it must have been a little over a year ago. Only at first, not Peter, not even Alice noticed the warning signs. Well, Alice started to get tired faster. If earlier after training she came home, cheerful, full of energy, now she barely had enough strength to take a shower. Then she'd fall on the couch, turn on the TV and watch shows. "It's not like you," Peter jokingly remarked. He'd come home from work later. "What can you do?" "Age?" Alice smiled. It was only the beginning. Ahead of the girl awaited much harder trials. But at that time, neither of the spouses even knew about it. Alice and Peter were planning children. Both dreamed of a large family. Peter even already looked for a house in the countryside. His apartment, of course, was very spacious and beautiful. But when they had children, they would need more space. And of course, a big garden with swings with merry-go-rounds for merry games. Alice loved talking about what kind of family they would have. The couple made grand plans. What would their children do? Where would they take them on trips? What kind of birthdays would they throw them? These were pleasant conversations. They made me feel warm and calm. But both Peter and Alice agreed that there was no need to hurry with the hares. The thing was that Peter often went on business trips. He had such a position, but soon he was to be promoted, and then these trips would stop. Only for this man needed to put himself to the full, to show himself at his best, and that took a lot of time and effort. In calm and prospects, and even higher-paying jobs Peter tried. He was often absent from home and business trips. Well, what child can be in such a situation? Yes, and Alice was actively working. A fitness trainer is a personal brand. You have to work hard to build it. Contracts with different fitness clubs in the city, incessant training to improve skills. Alice has not yet had time for motherhood. Both spouses led active lives, worked hard for a bright future together, and they were young, still very young. The biological clock was still ticking. They were not driven by anything. When will you please us, your parents, with grandchildren? Alice's mother often asked the young ones this question. We'll make our daughter happy, she promised, but it's not the time now. We're both pursuing careers. So you are. A child won't hurt. I'll always help you if you need it. "Mom, you have a weak heart. My conscience won't allow me to put an active baby on you." Later, Peter often remembered these conversations and desperately regretted that they did not listen to Helen's advice. The man felt tears coming to his eyes again. He still hadn't started the engine. It was getting dark. A snowstorm was beginning. Peter thought of the children he and Alice had never had time to bring into the world. On the one hand, if they still had a child, the man would feel less lonely in his life. There would be a meaning to live for, something to do to try. On the other hand, a little boy or girl would have lost his mother, the most dear and important person. Even thinking about it made me afraid. Peter pulled his phone out of his pocket, absent-mindedly flipping through the gallery. There were a lot of photos. Pictures from holidays, photos of documents, just random shots. The man was only interested in pictures of his wife. A year ago, the disease had already made itself known, but Alice still looked as normal as ever. She was trying to live her life as usual. True, such an active pace is no longer clearly could not withstand. First, the girl gave up a few part-time jobs, then dropped out of the courses she dreamed of finishing. Alice lost weight. She was now often nauseous. Peter at first even wrote it off as a sign of pregnancy. Yes, they planned to have heirs later, but they would have been happy with this scenario. The husband persuaded his beloved to undergo examination, himself enrolled her in the best local clinic, and even escorted to the reception Alice. Inspected her, took tests, did an ultrasound, scheduled a second appointment. The doctors needed time to wait for the results and formulate conclusions. Peter had little doubt. They would be happy with the pregnancy. It is nausea Alice and increasing dizziness weakness. He had already tried on the role of father. For the follow-up appointment, he accompanied his wife again. He wanted to be by her side when the doctors announced the good news. But the doctor's words shocked the couple. They could not make an accurate diagnosis. It was clear that it was a rare blood disorder. It was terrifying. On Peter's body ran a crowd of goosebumps. Feet, palms, instantly went cold. He looked at his fragile spouse and did not know how to help her. If Alice was threatened by external danger, Peter would have rolled mountains of his life, would not have spared in order to protect his beloved. Here, there's trouble like this on the inside, and there's nothing you can do about it. Alice held up well, calmly asked the doctor questions about further actions, was interested in the prospects. But the man in the white coat could not say much about her illness. The diagnosis had not been made precisely. Therefore, it was impossible to determine the scheme of treatment. The struggle began. Alice now went to the hospital as if it were work. By the way, the workers had to be forgotten for a while. It seemed for a while at the time. It was Peter's decision. He was earning money for treatment and living, and Alice needed more rest. That's what the doctor said. "Why don't you quit the health club?" The man gently suggested to Alice. "Just for a while, until you're cured. Then we'll make up for it." Peter was ready for his wife's objections to a heated argument with her. He knew how much Alice loved her work. She had confessed more than once that she couldn't live without sports. "But you're right, it's better this way. I've been getting a little tired lately." Alice agreed easily, too easily. It was as frightening as her strange, unspecified diagnosis. This submissiveness, this lack of strength and energy. And so the struggle began. Peter's parents pulled in all their connections. Alice was seen by the country's top doctors. She lay in the most modern clinics, received the best treatment. The girl was even consulted by foreign medical luminaries. Next to Alice were faithful people. Her mother, Helen, and her childhood friend, Emily. Emily often came to see Alice. Her job allowed her to show up at any time. Peter enjoyed her visits because they were the only ones who could get Alice to go shopping or to the movies. The red-haired friend had a marvelous effect on the patient. She acts with me as if nothing was going on. Trying to explain to Alice's husband, and I'm even starting to feel better. I'm starting to feel like nothing has changed either. From time to time, Alice was in hospitals and clinics. No one was ever able to diagnose her. It was some strange and unstudied type of blood cancer. Standard treatment didn't work, so the doctors experimented. What else was there to do? The interesting thing is that the treatment worked and the hospitalized Forrest got better. Indicators stabilized to the girl, gradually returned strength. She was discharged under home observation. Treatment continued, but sooner or later the disease always returned. The tests were worsening again, as was Alice's condition. The doctors had no idea. They had no idea. What's wrong? Tried new regimens, shyly rejoiced at the improvement that followed. Then everything went back to normal. As time went on, the Forrest got worse and worse. Peter watched with pain in his heart as his beloved grew weaker, lost weight, turned into a shadow. His whole life now consisted of worrying about his spouse and searching for doctors willing to take on this difficult case. Peter wished he could spend more time with Alice. She needed round-the-clock support. She needed someone to be there for her. But he had to work a lot. Quitting his job wasn't an option. The tests, the medications are expensive. You gotta pay the hospital bills somehow. It was a good thing they had both Emily, and Emily, not Helen, became Alice's primary caregiver in a difficult situation. Helen, she herself was in a terrible state of mind about everything that was happening to her daughter. The old woman's heart failed, and she had to go to the hospital a lot. The stress had exacerbated her chronic illness. Emily, on the other hand, was always on the job. Probably, and it was not easy to watch the slow fading of her best friend. But the girl found the strength to smile, and even to make Alice smile. Peter couldn't find the words to convey to Emily how grateful he was to her. The man wanted to hire a caregiver first, but Emily stopped him. Just imagine how Alyosha will feel with a stranger. And in general, caregivers are hired only for old women or heavy invalids. I don't want my friend to feel like that. Peter couldn't help but agree with her. When he offered Emily money, but she firmly refused. What are you? Are you out of your mind? What's the big deal? You're taking care of a sick person. A sick person spending time on Alice should be paid for. She's my friend. Emily gave Peter a reproachful look. We grew up together. We're like sisters, even closer than sisters. What money? I don't mind babysitting Alice, especially since my job allows it. Peter didn't insist. He knew that Igor didn't earn much and must be in need of funds. But she would definitely not take money for her friend's help. The man shared in the power of friendship, rejoiced for his wife. Not everyone has such a friend. And they also say that there is no such thing as female friendship. That last evening, Emily and Peter were having tea in the kitchen. The man was late for work, later than agreed. But Emily did not express her displeasure with a look, let alone a word. They often had dinner together like this, talking about Alice and more, with their son by their side. And it seemed to Peter that everything would be all right. She infected him with her optimism and faith in a favorable outcome. Emily often uttered the phrase when Alice would be well. She said it as if she never doubted for a moment that she would. But that night, even Emily looked a little too sad and confused. Alice was sick all day today. I even called an ambulance. The doctors offered to hospitalize her. I refused. Peter was right to approve. He already knew that the local hospitals wouldn't be able to help Alice. So why put her in a state hospital with strangers? I could barely get her to take her medication. She was so weak. Nothing. Peter clenched his fists tightly under the table. In 3 days, she'll be transported by special car to New York. She's ready to be admitted there. New York. Thinking about it again. Is it worth the stress? It's better for Alice to take it easy now. She needs to rest. You said the professor said so yourself. I can't just sit around. Peter shook his head. He didn't know what was best. No one did. But he had a lot of hope for the doctor who had taken an interest in Alice's case and was already working out an individual treatment scheme for the difficult patient. The other doctors refused to give up on Alice. They just shook their hands. They signed their own impotence. Well, here you have to hope only for a miracle, shook his head, the distinguished professor to whom Peter had recently turned. They can be miracles, of course, for his practice has seen a lot of such things that tell, will not believe. But Peter refused to live in hopes and dreams. He has always been a man of action and therefore continued to fight, looking for doctors willing to take on a difficult case. But the decision in any case, you and Alice smiled Emily goodbye. Maybe she really will be helped in New York. Who knows? I'll support you and I can do the best I can. Thank you, Peter said with feeling. You do so much for us. Well, how could I not? I'll be at your place by 9 tomorrow. I hope Alice will be better in the morning. But Emily's hopes were not realized. Peter sat by his wife's bedside for a long time that night, holding her thin hand, stroking her hair. She was already asleep. Alice had been in a deep sleep for 24 hours lately. It was for the best. Perhaps it would be easier to bear the hardships of an unknown illness. Even in her condition, Alice was a beauty. Pale and haggard, but still beautiful. Get well, whispered Peter in her ear, not knowing whether she could hear him or not. As soon as you're better, we'll go straight to Greece, to your favorite hotel. You'll wear a white bathing suit. She is a daughter. We'll feel good there, calm. That night, Peter fell asleep too quickly. Heavy thoughts didn't bother him. Maybe he was just very tired. In the morning, the man, as always, first went to check on his wife. There was an uneasiness. Alice usually woke up in the night, thirsty or in pain. Then the man would give her an injection, but this was silent. Alice lay exactly as Peter had placed her. The blanket hadn't even been pulled down. Her heart sank in an anxious premonition. The man realized everything even before he touched his spouse and felt the icy cold. The worst thing happened. It was like a dream. The first thing Peter did for some reason was dial Emily. She came rushing over. She took one look at Alice and cried loudly. Peter sat in the kitchen and watched cigarette after cigarette. His brain refused to accept the terrible truth. Emily, seeing the state of the man, quickly pulled herself together, made the necessary calls, and made a flurry of activity. It was she, Emily, who organized the funeral. Neither Peter nor Helen were capable of doing so in a state of shock and stupor. And now Peter is sitting here next to the restaurant, where Alice's wake has just taken place. It's been a difficult day. The funeral service at the church cemetery, the memorial dinner. The man has been holding back tears and tearing up the whole time. Sobs. Somehow, he didn't want to show his feelings in front of all these people who were looking at him with curiosity and interest. Alice looked like she was just sleeping. Peter looked at her so quiet and solemn restroom with fresh flowers. But remembering his wife was not what he wanted to remember. With an effort of will, the man conjured up images of a living Alice in his mind, of her laughing, of her teasing him, of her leading a fitness club class. Anything but that unnaturally calm face. The man decided he wasn't going home today. No. Everything there reminds him of the tragedy. Better to go to a hotel and get a room for a couple of nights. And then, when Peter comes to his senses, when he returns home, he will decide how to be with his beloved's things. And in general, there's so much to do, but not now. Later, Peter finally started the engine. He drove to the hotel near the train station. There were always vacancies there. The man suddenly felt hungry. Reminded at lunch, he couldn't swallow a bite, which wasn't surprising. What was strange was the other thing. How could he want anything at all in such a situation? But his stomach was growlingly reminding him of himself in the morning. Peter parked in the central station square and headed for a kiosk with a hot dog, wondering to himself, there were a lot of people here even at such a late hour. People coming and going, seeing off and greeting, and just people who wanted to buy something in the station stores. And then Peter felt someone's gaze on him. The man turned around and met eyes as black as the night itself. It was a young gypsy woman. Very young, almost a child. Her skin seemed even darker with the bright red lipstick that covered her full lips. From under a fluffy gray kerchief, a long braid poked out. The gypsy was wearing a short sheepskin coat, a floor-length purple skirt, and massive black sneakers. Realizing that the man had noticed her, the girl hurried over to him, stretching her lips into a welcoming smile. "Help, dear, what can you do?" The child is waiting at home hungry, and the gypsy began her song. Did this young lady have a hungry child? Peter didn't even want to think about it. Anyway, the girl needs money. Asked why not help, Peter slipped his hand into his pocket and handed the gypsy a few large bills. The girl looked at the money with disbelief. "Is this all for me?" "Yes," Peter nodded. "Why?" Do you need money? I have it. What's the problem? The gypsy woman smiled charmingly and hid the money in a clear bag. Thank you, dear. Peter nodded and got ready. It was all ready to pass by, but the gypsy woman held him by the sleeve of his down jacket. Wait, don't hurry. I see you're in trouble. Serious trouble. You've lost someone. Those words made Peter stop. How does she know? Maybe she saw him at the funeral today by chance. You've lost someone you love. The girl's face suddenly took on a sympathetic expression. Your wife or your favorite friend? How did you love her and still love her? How do you know this to me? Rudely asked Peter. A gypsy hand from his shoulder. A fortune teller. Without the slightest embarrassment, answered the girl. My grandmother gave me her gift. I see you do not believe, but it does not matter. You want to be rich. You gave me so much money. I want to do something to help you. I can see there's something wrong with your story, the weather. Suddenly Peter's decided. Really, what does he have to lose? The gypsy. She's got something on him. Shall I give you a hand? No, the girl smiled. I don't need all that. I need to look into your eyes. Look into your eyes. I'll see everything there. Well, look. And the gypsy woman began to look carefully into Peter's face. The man could not take his eyes off her incredibly black eyes. It was as if they were drawing him in, conjuring up thoughts in his head. Suddenly, there was not a single thought left. He felt light at heart, pleasant, as if this hard day and all the grief that had preceded it hadn't happened. The rest of the world suddenly ceased to exist for Peter. There were only 2 deep black lakes in front of him. The eyes of the young gypsy woman. How long this strange state lasted. Peter then tried to understand but couldn't. Maybe a couple of seconds, maybe a few minutes. And then suddenly the gypsy girl looked away sharply and everything returned. The noise of the station square, the unbearable weight on my heart, the smells, the thoughts. The gypsy looked strange. She looked confused. How much pain? Pronounced at last, the girl shook her head. A lot of pain and despair. But I understood why you lost the one you loved. I saw what a close bond there was between you. Now it's torn. Does it hurt? Of course it hurts. Peter thought the gypsy looked at him with sympathy, that he still couldn't believe her words, that she had an unusual gift, but how little did she know him from? It was unlikely, of course. Only that this girl might well have seen him in the cemetery, or at the church, heard something from people, and put 2 and 2 together. You don't believe it, the girl sighed. I can see you don't believe me. Well, do you want to tell me that you promised your beloved on her last night to take her on a trip to Greece as soon as she recovered? Peter shuddered. He suddenly remembered clearly how he had sat by the bedside of Alice, who was already asleep, and whispered to her in her ear the words about the trip. He promised to take her to the sea and begged her to get well soon. No one could know that for sure. Maybe the gypsy just guessed, but I don't think so. I told you I had a gift from my grandmother. The dark-haired girl said seriously. I saw something else. Scary. Your favorite. She didn't leave on her own. Helped her how? Who's in my wife? She was sick. A very rare diagnosis. The doctors tried, but the disease came on its own. The gypsy woman said quietly, looking straight into Peter's eyes. And he immediately believed it. What? What happened to her? The truth, you won't like it, sighed the girl. But you have to know it, because you might be in danger yourself. I have to help you. You're a good man, generous, kind. I'll tell you everything. You're ready. Peter wasn't sure if he was ready, and yet he nodded his head. A close person, a very close person, your favorite person, had done this. She trusted him with her. This woman she is, and she drove your love to the grave. Intentionally. I see a lot of black envy, so black it's scary. I rarely see that in people. Peter, of course, immediately thought of Emily. She was the only one who fit that description. Alice had no one closer than her and her mother. Helen obviously couldn't hurt her daughter. Neither could Emily, but the gypsy girl's red hair continued. This young woman has red hair. Emily exhaled. Finally, Peter. The red hair is a detail that dispelled all doubts. I can't see any names, unfortunately. The gypsy woman shook her head. Redhead, young, pretty, very angry and jealous. Bad energy. She did something to make your beloved sick. She did it all the time, and she had the opportunity. She was always there for her, the one who's not here anymore. Peter looked at the young fortune teller in confusion. Now he believed every word she said. The man felt it himself. He himself had noticed something unpleasant in India, some insincerity. Only lately Peter had been chasing those thoughts away. After all, Emily had done so much for Alice. She was always there for her, helping and supporting her. The man felt guilty because of such an attitude to a selfless friend to his wife. How do I figure out what it did? How do I get proof? The gypsy shrugged her shoulders and raised her sad eyes at her interlocutor. That I do not know. I'm not your helper here. Think maybe there is some way she must be punished. Peter nodded. He realized that he wouldn't get any more information from the gypsy. The girl had told him enough already. Thank you. Peter took another large bill out of his wallet and handed it to the girl. She nodded gratefully and accepted the extra payment, which she hadn't even expected. The man turned around and walked with a determined stride toward his car. Had he changed his mind about spending the night at the hotel? No, he absolutely had to go home to look for proof. And he already had thoughts on how to do it. Wait. The voice of a young fortune teller came from behind him. Peter turned around, keeping her away from the redhead and this one, not trusting her. She is very dangerous. The man nodded briefly and continued on his way. The house was empty without Alice. Quiet, dark. Things were lying everywhere in disarray. On the eve of the funeral, Peter was in no condition to keep things in order. Peter went straight to the kitchen. There was a hidden surveillance camera installed under the ceiling. Only he and Alice knew about it. The thing was that it was in the kitchen that a safe was installed, also hidden from prying eyes camouflaged. There was money, valuables, and most importantly, important documents, contracts, agreements, everything that was of special value to the company where Peter worked. The installer of the safe recommended to equip the kitchen with a camera. That's what everyone does nowadays because, well, you never know. Of course, you probably won't need it. But there are times when these records come in very handy during a trial. Well, Peter installed the camera. He almost never thought about it. But now, after a strange conversation with the gypsy and realized the safe deposit box was right, now he needs those tapes too. By the way, the farther Peter went away from the place of meeting with the fortune teller, the less faith in the reality of what was happening at home remained. The words of the young gypsy woman seemed to the man a typical divorce. The girl simply wanted to talk his teeth in, to extract as much money as possible through the stranger. A common practice of street beggars. Perhaps the gypsy girl had even hypnotized him somehow, and everything he had heard from this girl was just a figment of the inflamed imagination of a man who had lost his beloved. Nevertheless, Peter decided to look at the surviving footage from the camera. It seems that the videos should remain in the memory of the device for 3 months is quite enough time. If Emily is really involved in something, Peter will see it. The man spent all night in front of his laptop monitor, watching footage from his own kitchen. It was hard in places, very hard. Alice glimpsed in the footage, albeit faint from the ears of the pale, but still alive. At the quick transition, especially the changes happening to the girl, the changes were striking. It was as if she were melting away. Day by day, she was turning into a drone ghost. Peter saw her and Alice having breakfast in the kitchen, talking about something, smiling at each other. That was still only 2 months ago. Soon the girl had gone completely blind, and Peter was already carrying breakfast to her bed. More carefully. All in all, the man was looking at pictures from India. Alice's friend stayed at their house all the time, so she was a frequent heroine of videos from the kitchen. Emily was working right there, sitting at the kitchen table. She typed fluently on her laptop, distracted from time to time by preparations and phone calls. Sometimes she'd disappear from the kitchen for long periods of time, probably watching TV in the living room and chatting with Alice. The camera was only in the kitchen. Peter noticed something else Emily added to the food she cooked for Alice. Some liquid from a small bottle with a red cap. The man first thought it was one of Alice's medications, but the bottle was stored in a cabinet under the sink. That's an odd place for a medicine. It was as if Emily had purposely hidden it from view. The thing is that under the sink was a niche, an empty space between the furniture and the wall, a kind of hiding place. Apparently, that's where the strange bottle was. Emily added this liquid to everything Alice gave her: porridge, soups, drinks, even fruit. With amazement and horror, Peter watched Emily inject the obscure drug with a syringe directly into Alice. It seemed more than strange. Peter had an idea of what medications his wife was taking, and the list of medications did not include anything liquid, only pills. And they didn't need to be taken that often, not at every meal. They were all potent prescription drugs. A terrible realization struck Peter. Could it be? Could Emily have poisoned Alice? It didn't make sense, but there were videotapes. The camera had captured everything as clearly and as thoroughly as possible. Peter got up from the table and went into the kitchen. He opened the cupboard under the sink, stuck his hand into the niche. He didn't expect to find anything there. Emily, because if she really did it, she'd surely gotten rid of the evidence long ago. She had the opportunity, but no. Peter pulled out the bottle with the red cap. It was almost empty. Only at the bottom were a few drops of an unidentifiable substance. Peter was sure that this would be enough to analyze. The man's cell phone vibrated in his pocket. The name Emily appeared on the screen. Wow, had she sensed something or something? Yes, Peter tried very hard to keep his voice steady and calm. You didn't seem to have your face all over the place. Maybe I should come over. Do you need my help? And Emily blatantly asked to come to Peter's apartment. Maybe she remembered that she hadn't hidden the bottle. It's okay, the man replied. I'm already in bed. No, don't come. I'll see you later. Okay, but if there's anything I know, I'm ready to listen to you any time of the day or night. There's that unprecedented selflessness again. What does he want now? As soon as Peter dropped the call from Emily, he immediately began to search his phone for the number of his former classmate. He was now working for the investigative committee. Peter needed counseling. Where should he go with his evidence and suspicions? Where to start the investigation? It's not every day you find out your wife's best friend is a criminal. Once he contacted the investigators, the case spun at breakneck speed. I had to pull some strings. Not without that, but the results came back fast. There was a very toxic substance in the bottle. And yes, its effects on the human body could cause the symptoms and consequences Alice had, but it's extremely difficult to detect in the bloodstream. So the doctors didn't, especially since they weren't looking for traces of poison. Who would even think of such a thing? You can't get such a drug by accident, and a non-professional couldn't have made it either. Most likely a poisoner. That would require contact with people outside the law. Well, or he was an experienced chemist himself, so there was no doubt that Alice had been poisoned. It was a hard thought to accept. After learning the cause of his wife's death, it took Peter a long time to calm down. He threw things against the wall, growled like a rabid animal, smashed everything in sight, and like the neighbors. Only the police weren't called. Peter realized he could have prevented it. He could have, if only it had occurred to him to look at the security footage earlier. If only he had sent Alice for long-term treatment in a clinic where they would have been barred from entering. After all, his beloved had always gotten better while away from home. The symptoms didn't disappear completely, but the girl's condition clearly improved, and at home everything started all over again. No wonder. There was no Emily in the hospitals either, who generously supplied poison with every portion of Alice's food. The sneaky friend may have succeeded in injecting, nodding off the drugs, the food she brought to the hospital for the patient. But these were very different doses. That's why Alice was getting better within the hospital walls. Why didn't Peter make the connection between these facts in time? Proving Emily's guilt was more difficult. Yes, the video clearly showed her putting liquid in her friend's food. But there's no telling what was in that bottle. Not caught, as they say. Presumption of innocence. Emily's fingerprints were on the glass. But Peter's fingers were there too. So he was under suspicion for a while too. Emily, of course, was called in for questioning. Afterward, she called Peter, yelling at him on the phone, shamefully trying to make him feel sorry for her. How could you think that of me? I've known Alice since she was a little girl. I've known her a lot longer than you have. She's like a sister to me. I would never hurt her. I've spent so much time taking care of her. And you? I've seen you give it to her. Saw it with my own eyes." Peter was very happy that Emily lived across town. He was ready to tear that bitch apart with his own hands for what she'd done. But he can't go to jail. There are parents, there is Helen, who is now all alone. There's work, people need him. And he's not going to get framed for Emily, the bastard will be punished by the law. Peter didn't even doubt that it would happen sooner or later. After all, the investigator discovered more and more details, so managed to find the manufacturers of poison. They confirmed that it was Emily who ordered it. And voila, they even had a record of it. These people were filming their customers to protect themselves. Having video evidence came in handy. Other evidence was found: Emily's fingerprints, traces of the substance in her purse, and in the toilet where she tried to flush the poison. She did not take into account the fact that the drug is well eaten into all surfaces. Detecting its presence even after a while is a very simple and feasible task. Molecules of the substance were even found under Emily's fingernails. And then there was the trial. The evidence base was very rich, so there was no problem with the verdict. Peter looked at Emily after the judge announced the verdict. Of course, the man was present at every session. It was important to him. Very important. 10 years in a maximum security penal colony. A long term, of course, but in Peter's opinion, insufficient. The mitigating circumstance for this red-haired monster was gender. Women don't get much, but at least this 10 years will spend behind bars. Emily looked at Peter with undisguised malice. There was despair, fear, rage in her eyes, but not remorse. A true monster. How could you? With tears in your voice? Helen exclaimed. She too was present at the sentencing. For her, the news that Emily was involved in Alice's death was a shocking revelation. The elderly woman knew Emily as a little girl came to her house, fed her delicious pancakes, even took her daughter's friend to her work for New Year's matinees. Consider the neighbor girl a relative and took a direct part in her upbringing, especially since Emily's parents did not care much about the child. And then all of a sudden this happens. How could you do such a thing? Helen repeated, looking at Emily. We trusted you so much. You always thought I was inferior. Emily replied dismissively. We didn't. You took advantage of me. I have no regrets. Now that the verdict had been pronounced and could not be appealed, Emily was no longer hiding her feelings and thoughts. Helen suddenly trembled violently. Peter hugged her tightly by the shoulders. He felt responsible for Alice's mother now. She was all alone after all. Peter immediately decided that he would never leave her. Immediately after Emily's exposure, Peter went to Station Square again. He wanted to find that gypsy woman. Why? The man himself could not clearly answer this question. Perhaps to thank the fortune teller, who had helped him to find out the truth about Alice's death. If it hadn't been for that chance encounter, he would still be convinced that it was an insidious, poorly understood disease. Or maybe the man just wanted to be sure that the conversation with the gypsy had really happened, that the girl existed, because their conversation seemed too unreal and strange to him. But he did not find the young fortune teller at the station. There were gypsies there, but not the same ones. He had never met anyone like the girl with the amazing black eyes. The man tried to ask people about local beggars, gypsies, sellers in kiosks and stalls. In Peter's opinion, they must have known those who often appeared in the square. But Peter's interlocutors only shrugged their shoulders and spread their hands. None of them recognized his description of the gypsy. Peter was a little disappointed by the failure. On the other hand, some secrets and should remain secret. The main thing is that the girl fortune teller helped him find those responsible for Alice's death. 3 years have passed since the tragedy. A lot of things have changed. Peter has traveled a long road to mental healing. There were on this road and meditation practices and visits to psychologists and psychotherapists. The man quit his job, started his own business. First he failed, then he succeeded. Sold an old apartment in which everything resembled tragedies. Bought a cozy country house in a quiet, picturesque cottage village. Peter was slowly coming back to life. He realized that Helen needed his support, and his parents were worried about their adult son. That's why Peter worked on himself. Gradually, life began to shine again. The sadness and longing for Alice did not go away. They remained forever in Peter's heart, just like the tradition to visit the cemetery several times a year. Alice's birthday the day she left. And yet one day, Peter was surprised to realize that he could enjoy the simple things. A delicious dinner, socializing with friends, the beauty of nature. He even met a girl who was beautiful, intelligent, understanding. She was nothing like Alice in looks or character. Peter didn't want to replace his wife. It just sort of worked itself out. Peter didn't think it was possible, but he felt familiar feelings. Joy at the sight of a pleasant person, warmth developing in his chest. Betty had become his salvation. Betty knew Peter's story. She had had her own losses and tragedies in her life. Anyway, one day they realized it was time for them to live together. It was easier and more satisfying. Peter and Betty got married without any grand ceremony or pomp. Neither of them needed it. Helen was happy for Peter. She was right, she said. Life goes on. Life goes on. The woman was able to cope with the loss too. She has new hobbies, dancing for those over 50. Book club. Helen lived, socialized, tried to enjoy life. Peter helped her as much as he could. Helen and Peter often discussed what Emily had done. They both couldn't get their heads around what she had done, and they both blamed themselves for not seeing it sooner. But it's not like there wasn't some kind of preconditions. Emily was always so polite, so friendly. Helen shook her head, making eye contact, smiling. Offers to help. Her parents both drank, especially her father. They had no time for their daughter. Not exactly a marginalized family anyway. Not exactly prosperous. I took pity on Emily. I gave Alice some things. Emily often wore old and dirty skirts and blouses to school. And she was so grateful. Thank you 100 times, it's embarrassing. And she and Alice were thick as thieves all their lives. What happened? Peter shook his head and was in no hurry to share his own thoughts with Helen. He too was tormented by that question. Why? Why? Alice always treated her friends so well and warmly, helped her out with money if she needed help, rushed to her first call, comforted and supported her. When Emily did not succeed in something and sincerely rejoiced at her friend's successes. It would seem that such a kind, loyal person, next to a gift of fate and a great rarity. So why? Maybe there was something that neither Peter nor Helen knew about, some dark history. These thoughts kept Peter in the dark. In the end, 3 years after the tragedy, he finally made up his mind, made the documents for a visit with Emily in prison. He was warned right away. Emily is not in the best of health. Someone gave her tuberculosis. The treatment was long and grueling. Eventually, the disease was controlled, but the damage the disease had done to her body was irreversible. They were irreversible. She didn't have long to live. That's what our doctors say, said Peter, a female correctional officer in blue camouflage. What's my point? So you won't be surprised when you see her? The girls changed in appearance. And her? She agreed to talk to me right away, Peter said. When the man applied for a date, he was prepared for Emily to refuse to see him. He was the one who had put her behind bars. The woman must have hated him all these years. Why wouldn't she? She grinned, she'll keep it. You'd think someone would visit her. No family, no friends. At least she's getting some attention. The date took place in a room that resembled an ordinary home living room. A soft sofa, 2 comfortable armchairs, a coffee table, even a flat-screen TV on the wall. Peter spent about 20 prison minutes in this room before Irina entered it. Yes, she was right. The woman had changed a lot. Probably wouldn't have recognized her on the street if Peter had met her by chance somewhere. And Emily had always had a pleasant fullness about her. Now she resembled a skeleton of tight, dry wrinkles with skin of some obscure yellow color. Her once lush, bright red hair had turned to a liquid, dull gray. Emily looked like she was getting ready for a date. Her thin, tightly compressed lips were coated with a cherry gloss on sparse lashes. Cheap mascara lingered on their skates. For the first instant, Peter even felt sorry for her. Then he remembered what she'd done. Emily had brought her friend to a slow and agonizing death, and now she was sick and looked almost as Alice had in her last months of life. Wouldn't you like to think about retribution? Emily smiled at Peter, exposing her aggrieved teeth. Slowly, she walked over to the chair and settled herself across from her visitor, their round coffee table separating them. Peter looked at Emily and did not know where to start the conversation. The right words had somehow slipped his mind. He had planned this conversation. He had prepared questions, the right phrases. But Emily's appearance threw the man off balance. "You see what you've become." The woman grinned sadly. She looked at Peter without anger, without resentment. He had assumed that Emily would immediately jump on him with accusations. But no, it was as if she were seeking his approval, looked ingratiatingly into his eyes, and seemed to be trying to win his guest's sympathy. It was strange. "I know your illness is," pronounced the man at last. "I don't have long to live, they say." Now you understand how Alice felt. The words came off Peter's lips before he could think them through. Then about sex. Now Emily could just get up, turn around, and walk away. And he wouldn't get any answers out of her. And he needs to know. He needs to know why. Why would Emily do this to a friend who trusted her? But Emily stayed. She shook her head slowly. A spark of anger flashed in her fallen eyes, and it surprisingly revitalized the haggard face, made it more emotional. Alice woman literally spat out that name. So much hatred was put into a short word, so much dislike. My whole life has been spoiled since childhood, tormented me since I was a child. Do you know why I came to you? It's not hard to guess. I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. I'd even waited for you much sooner. Do you want to know why I did that? Peter nodded briefly. He struggled to keep from saying something mean. How many times had he yelled at her when he was home alone, yelling at a woman who couldn't hear him because she was far away in a prison in another city? Peter had called her the very last words, and he had felt strangely relieved. But now it was impossible to give in to his feelings. Emily must tell. She must explain herself. Perhaps she needs it too. "Tell me everything," calmly said Peter. "I want to know everything." She always put herself above me, Emily began. "We seemed to be friends, but Emily, she acted like I was second class. It was a given, and as a kid, I took it for granted. She's a successful princess and a beautiful girl, and I'm just a sidekick." Emily was born into a well-to-do, but not very well-to-do family. No, her parents worked. They weren't exactly marginalized. They both liked to drink. Evenings in their apartment gathered in large and noisy companies. Vodka flowed. Toasts were made one after another. Then it all ended either with violent quarrels with a fight or peacefully. Postponing guests, hosts, in hibernation throughout the apartment. Both options were not good. Emily had to huddle in her room on a small sofa. Often some babies, children, guests, parents were put under her. Sometimes the girl had to sleep on a wet sheet. These kids didn't wake up at night to go to the bathroom. The parents seemed to love and care for their daughter. But for some reason, it was the child they were saving money on. Emily never had a nice new dress or a briefcase. She was bought the cheapest stationery. Her parents didn't have enough money for school books at all. So Emily, no matter how hard she tried, could not do well in some subjects. Surprisingly, her mother and father always had money for drinking with friends. One day, Emily asked them a direct question. Why is it so that the parents have enough for a feast, but they can't get their daughter ready for school properly? "Our mother and my mother are working people," ringing Matt's righteous indignation voice, explained my father. "My money we earn, we feed you. We need to relax somehow, to relieve stress, otherwise we will die at such a life." Emily did not understand why the parents' stress relief should necessarily turn into stress for her and Emily. But her mother and father didn't give her adequate explanations. "Everyone grows up that way," the mother parried. "Don't make a victim of yourself. Don't be a victim. You know how strictly my father and I were punished for the slightest offense. We don't lay a finger on you. And about the money. Times are hard now. All the kids are growing up like this. No one's getting spoiled." But Emily knew that. She could see that not all kids grow up like that. You didn't have to look far for an example. Alice, Emily's neighbor's best friend, was enough. She was raised by her mother alone. Alice had never seen her father and didn't even know who he was. Mother and daughter lived poorly. But Helen had a very special relationship with Alice. On her tiny salary, she managed to please her daughter, built up the means to buy Alice beautiful clothes for school, paid for all her school trips, cooked delicious meals for her, and most importantly, always took an interest in her daughter's affairs. Asked her how her day was going. She was aware of all Alice's relationships with her classmates. Alice and Emily were friends from a very young age. They met in the backyard sandbox. 5-year-old Emily was already walking alone. The girl's mother assured the neighbors that in this way she was teaching her daughter to be independent. Emily was even proud of it at first. Her parents walk her peers, and she was left to her own devices. Then that having already become older, the girl realized the reason for everything was banal maternal laziness and indifference, I guess. Zealously looked after her mother, and not obsessively, and from afar, not interfering in her games and conversations with other children. Helen was just there to make sure that nothing happened to her daughter on the street. The girls became friends. Alice was the first to approach the red-haired Emily and declared that she looked like Pippi Longstocking from the cartoon. Emily was interested. It was the first time she had heard the name of this character, and Alice began to tell her fascinating stories about the red-haired girl, who was like a magnet attracting different incidents. It was fascinating. From then on, Emily and Alice became inseparable. Helen, it must be said, encouraged this friendship and always made Emily feel welcome. Emily was now a frequent visitor to Alice's house. She was surprised that her friend had her own room and that it was so well organized. A closet with children's books, a huge toy box, beautiful potted flowers on the windowsill, a comfortable desk, soft princess bedding. Emily herself had never had anything like it. And Alice's mother, after all, she made far less money than Emily's parents. It's just that this woman worked hard for her daughter. Alice was the light in the window of her life's top priority. But Emily's mother and father considered their daughter a useless appendage in their small family, a problem with an extra mouth, though they assured that they loved their daughter very much. Usually both were barely moving their tongues at this time due to heavy libations. Helen never yelled at her daughter, never punished her. One day, Alice dropped a glass in front of Emily. It fell to the floor, shattered into small shards, large drops of compote or the wall. Emily squeezed her head into her shoulders. She thought a scandal was about to break out. At least she wouldn't have been patted on the head at home for something like this. But Helen only smiled. "For good luck," she said. "And in the case of his daughter, put the rag away behind you. Only carefully, no one before." The woman carefully watched how Alice coped with the work, gently guided, gave advice, and then also praised the girl for her labor. Probably it was at that very moment that Emily felt envious of her friend for the first time. Wow, she lives in her room like a princess, and her mother does not scold her for anything. Why some have everything and others nothing? It was time for the girls to go to the first grade. It so happened that the friends were at the same desk, which both unspeakably pleased. Soon it turned out that the study is given to girls is not too easy. Before school, Emily and Alice dreamed aloud how they would become the best students in the class. But in reality, they were somewhere in the middle. Emily was glad that at least here Alice did not overtake her and tried hard, did her homework, listened attentively to the teacher, even studied at home additionally, all for the sake of becoming better than her friend. True, all these efforts did not bear fruit. The girls' grades were about the same and very mediocre. And then, one day at the physical education lesson to the first grader came gymnastics coach from the sports school. She watched the kids practicing carefully, tracking down promising students. In the end, Alice and several other girls from their class were chosen. The children were invited to a screening at the sports school. Emily cried when she got home and was rejected. Alice had been picked and she hadn't. She's out again. But Helen noticed that they were very upset about something. The girl started asking around and confessed to her that she would have liked to do gymnastics too, but she hadn't been chosen. Helen hugged Emily and promised that everything would be arranged. Alice's mother felt sorry for her daughter's friend, probably realizing that she was having a hard time with her parents. And indeed, Helen went to the coach, talked to her, and MSU was added to the group. As an exception, how happy was she? No, Emily was not going to become a great gymnast. The main thing is that now the girl felt herself on equal terms with Alice. Not inferior, on equal terms. And she was also selected for the group. The older the friends grew, the more obvious was the gap between them. Alice was one of the best students of her year in the sports school, and Emily in a few years was offered to look for another sport. Thanks to the tutoring Helen hired and the tutor, Alice was learning better and better, while Emily remained a weak C student. Alice had nice, albeit inexpensive, outfits. Emily, on the other hand, wore rags that her parents had gotten from their children's friends. And so it was with everything. Alice was more liked and respected in class. The boys looked up to her. She had a more interesting and fulfilling life than her best friend. That made Emily angry. Yes, she and Alice were friends, and that friendship had many perks for Emily. For example, Alice would let her cheat at home and lend her stuff for the disco. Helen constantly called Emily for lunch and fed her with delicious pies, Valenki. He also wrapped some guests with him. One day, Emily realized that even this care and pity Helen humiliates her. As if the woman sees that her daughter's friend is a pathetic creature and tries to comfort her out of the goodness of her heart. Emily was angry with Alice, despite the benefits that she received from communicating with her. Alice didn't see it that way. She thought that Emily was the most loyal, reliable person. She shared her notable dreams with her, trusted her with secrets. Naive, foolish, trusting. That open and honest look of hers was infuriating too. Emily, there was a sense of purity and freshness in Alice that was no longer present in Emily herself. Surely Alice had never once in her life been tormented by the torment of other people's evil thoughts. And here she was lucky. Emily looked like a loyal friend to Alice, but secretly she was waiting for some trouble to happen to the girl, and she was very happy when it happened. So Alice lacked literally a few points for admission to the Faculty of Economics. The girl almost cried when she shared this news with her friend. Emily comforted Alice, trying to hide her joy. But at least somewhere close, nasty unlucky. You see, my mom paid so much money to tutors. She wanted me to be an economist. I feel sorry for her. Yeah, but what can you do? I can be philosophical. Emily, not everything in life works out the way you want it to. But I didn't really want to go to that department myself. I dream of something else. I just feel sorry for my mom. Emily kept a sad look and shook her head sympathetically. And the birds were singing in her soul. It's the right thing to do. Emily herself did not even think about higher education, especially about such a prestigious faculty. The girl realistically assessed her possibilities, but Alice did not succeed either. Emily rejoiced. After school, Emily entered the culinary school. The only place for her meager scores were enough. Parents rejoiced. The profession of bread, good. Emily herself already knew then that she would never work in the catering industry. Not for her such physical labor will find another way in life to settle down. Marriage, after all, will be successful. That's not a solution. Alice ended up getting a better job, which again caused pain in Emily's heart. A friend entered the Pedagogical Institute at the Department of Physical Education. The girl has always loved sports, and she was good at it. After graduating, she did not go to work at school, but got a job in a fitness club. She immediately got good money and her own clientele, who could not get enough of the young trainer. Alice told her friend how she liked her work, shared her successes, constantly went somewhere to study, became more and more in demand and highly paid. Emily was once again desperately jealous. She even cried into her pillow at night at the injustice of it. At that time, she already hated her friend. But I couldn't break up with her anyway, though it might have been a relief as well. No, Emily continued to play the devoted friend. Emily herself had also found a reasonable income. She had learned to fill out cards for money for the market belts, and there were plenty of orders. It was a job with no prospects for development, and the pay was pennies. More, of course, than Emily would have earned in the canteen. But the girl had a completely different appetite. She couldn't get enough of Alice's ever-increasing salary. Life was again pointing out to each friend. Her place, stagnation and green swamp for Emily, and interesting work and development for Alice again injustice. All of this only fueled the hatred. But Emily still hoped that she would manage to settle in life as well as her friends, maybe even much better. She had only one option, so it seemed to the girl herself a successful marriage. All she had to do was to find a rich guy, charm him, marry him, and all a happy life was assured. Alice does not consider such an option. She revolves in her work and searches for herself, but Emily goes the other way, more effective, and most importantly, faster. Except it didn't work out. Emily tried very hard, looking for acquaintances, trying to please young people from wealthy families. Often because of this, had to step on their throats, to adjust to others, even somewhere to humiliate. And the result was still not there, not counting the short-lived romances, which did not stretch to a serious relationship. Emily felt devastated and disappointed after another failure, when Alice told her about Peter. And that's when the hatred flared up with renewed vigor. Peter was exactly the kind of man Emily dreamed of, from a wealthy family, educated with a good job, great prospects, and he really loved Alice. Emily saw how he looked at her friend with admiration and tenderness. No one had ever looked at Emily like that. It was painful and hurtful. Emily made several attempts to charm and take Peter away, but quickly realized that it wouldn't work. And then another blow. Alice and Peter got married. All of Emily's dreams were somehow unbelievably coming true for her hated friend. How could she bear it? Emily did not immediately decide on a terrible deed. First, she tried for a long time to organize her life, but to no avail. Neither in her career nor in her relationships. The girl never succeeded. Against this background, Alice's life seemed as shiny as the foil on a bottle of expensive champagne. A dizzying career, a rich and handsome husband. Peter. Emily cared about him. He was exactly the kind of man she dreamed of. And it wasn't just his money and prospects. Appearance, manner of speech, smile, all of it echoed in Emily's heart. All of it kept her on her toes. Emily wanted to be in Alice's shoes. When he put his arm around her waist, looked into her eyes. Action. Emily decided when her friend shared an intimate detail with her. Alice said she and Peter were thinking about having children. And then there was this. Emily couldn't stand it. The plan wasn't spontaneous. First, they had to scour the internet in search of the most suitable way to eliminate the rival. It was necessary to do everything so that she then did not calculate. And the perfect match was found. Emily found people who could make the cure. Their work wasn't cheap, but Emily couldn't spare any money for her dream. From there, it was simple. Alice trusted her friend. They met often, had lunch together. The symptoms didn't show up right away. Emily thought she'd been duped. The medication wasn't working. But then her friends started complaining of feeling sick. Emily was still afraid to believe that everything was going according to plan. Only Alice was getting worse and worse every day. And then she went blind. There was no doubt in Emily's mind. And the governor pretended to be a faithful friend. She was always by Alice's side, supporting her and slowly poisoning her. Now Emily felt stronger and more beautiful, and Alice was fading away. There was no trace of her success left. When Alice was gone, Emily felt a great relief. There was no one else in the world that she would never be able to keep up with. No, there are, of course, other women far more successful and beautiful than Emily. There are plenty of them, but they don't touch. Emily doesn't touch the strings in her soul. But Alice doesn't, and Peter is free now. Emily had a plan. She wanted to be a support for Peter and a comfort to him. It seemed to her that he would notice her during this difficult period, notice and appreciate her, and they would be together. Without Alice, everything should work out for her now. But something went wrong. An unexpected call to the police to press charges. Emily was frightened then, very frightened. The young woman didn't want to end up behind bars. But Emily has never regretted what she did. What happened to Alice? Now you know everything. Emily finished her story. You sent your friend to the grave out of jealousy. Peter still couldn't believe that motive. Is envy such a strong feeling? That's exactly what Emily confirmed and smiled. In that smile, you could see the joy of a winner. Peter suddenly felt uncomfortable and afraid. Goosebumps ran down his back. A monster was sitting in front of him. A monster who had created such a thing out of envy. Alice had died because of being more successful than her friend. Unthinkable. You know, I should probably go, Peter said in a steady voice and got up from the couch. Wait, no one has come to see me in all these years. Let's talk a little more. I'm going to die soon. But the man left the room, closing the door behind him. And he had a lot to think about. Peter wanted rather to share what he had learned with Betty, to talk to her about this difficult story. But Helen, he would never tell her. It would be too much for her to bear. Let her keep thinking Emily's just crazy. It's easier that way.